My name is Catherine Ellis. I'm 31 years old, and while I was fighting for my life in a medically induced coma after a devastating car accident, my own family sold my entire $1.8 million art collection, 10 years of careful curation and personal passion, then had the audacity to divide the remaining money at my hospital bedside while discussing their vacation plans and luxury purchases as I lay weak and confused, barely able to speak. What they didn't know was that their heartless liquidation of my life's work while I was unconscious was about to trigger the most comprehensive legal destruction they could imagine, one that would cost them everything they thought they could steal from someone they assumed would never wake up to stop them. The art collection that represented my life's work and deepest passion had taken me a decade to build, starting with my first purchase as a struggling graduate student in art history, and growing into one of the most respected contemporary collections in the region. Every piece had been carefully selected, not just for its investment potential, but for its emotional resonance and artistic significance, representing relationships with emerging artists I had discovered and mentored throughout my career as a curator. My apartment was a carefully designed gallery space, where each painting and sculpture was positioned to create conversations between the works, with lighting and placement that honored the artist's intentions, while allowing the collection to function as a cohesive artistic statement. Friends and colleagues regularly visited to experience what one art critic had described as a masterclass in contemporary collection building that demonstrates both exceptional taste and profound understanding of artistic development. Catherine, your collection tells the story of this generation's most important artistic voices, my mentor Professor Margaret Chen had told me just weeks before my accident. You haven't just been buying art. You've been documenting and supporting a cultural movement that will be studied for decades to come. The financial value of my collection, while significant, was almost secondary to its cultural importance and the personal relationships it represented. I had worked directly with 17 different artists over the years, providing them with exhibition opportunities, connecting them with other collectors, and helping them develop their careers during the crucial early stages when recognition and financial support could make the difference between artistic success and abandonment of creative dreams. The centerpiece of my collection was a painting by my late mentor, Professor James Mitchell, who had died of cancer 3 years earlier. The piece, titled Conversations with Tomorrow, was not just worth $400,000 according to recent appraisals. It was irreplaceable as the final work of a beloved teacher who had shaped my understanding of art and had given me the piece as a graduation gift when I completed my master's degree. This painting represents everything I want you to remember about art, Professor Mitchell had told me when he presented the work. It's not about market value or investment returns. It's about human connection, creative expression, and the responsibility we have to support artists who are brave enough to share their vision with the world. My career as a curator at the Contemporary Arts Museum had flourished alongside my collecting activities, with my expertise in identifying emerging talent leading to several major exhibitions that had established the reputations of artists who are now internationally recognized. The symbiotic relationship between my professional work and personal collection created opportunities for both that wouldn't have existed in isolation. But my family had never understood or appreciated my passion for art, consistently treating my collection as an expensive hobby, rather than recognizing it as both a professional achievement and a cultural contribution. During family gatherings, they would make dismissive comments about spending so much money on weird paintings, and suggest that I should be investing in practical assets like real estate or stocks. Catherine wastes so much money on those strange pictures, my brother David would say during family dinners. She could have bought 3 rental properties with what she spent on art, and at least those would generate actual income instead of just hanging on walls. The fundamental misunderstanding of art as cultural expression versus commodity investment created ongoing tension in my family relationships, but I had assumed that my passion and expertise would eventually be respected, even if they weren't fully understood. Have you ever pursued something you love deeply, while your family treated it as a frivolous waste of resources? That's exactly what I experienced throughout my career as an art curator and collector, but I never imagined their dismissive attitude would lead to such devastating betrayal during my most vulnerable moment. The car accident that changed everything happened on a rainy Thursday evening in October, while I was driving home from a gallery opening, where I had been celebrating the first solo exhibition of Maria Santos, a young artist whose career I had been supporting for 3 years. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit my car at 50 miles per hour, causing traumatic brain injuries that required immediate surgery and a medically induced coma to allow my brain to heal from the severe swelling. Ms. Ellis has sustained significant traumatic brain injury, Dr. Patricia Rodriguez explained to my family during the first week of my hospitalization. We've placed her in a medically induced coma to reduce brain swelling and give her the best possible chance of recovery. The next few months will be critical for determining the extent of her neurological recovery. The medical team's cautious optimism about my long-term prognosis was apparently interpreted by my family as an opportunity to begin settling my estate, rather than focusing on my recovery and rehabilitation. Instead of hoping for my survival and healing, they began treating my potential death as a financial windfall that needed to be secured before legal complications could arise. During the 3 months I spent unconscious, my family made decisions about my art collection that would have been impossible if I had been awake to protect the work I had spent a decade building, using power of attorney documents and claiming that my survival was unlikely. Despite the medical team's ongoing treatment efforts, they began liquidating my collection through emergency estate sales that prioritized speed over value. The doctor said Catherine probably wouldn't make it, my sister Jennifer later told friends, though this was never the medical team's actual assessment. We had to make sure her assets were protected and accessible for family needs instead of being tied up in probate complications for years. The false narrative about my prognosis provided cover for their systematic theft of my art collection, but what made their betrayal even more devastating was learning that they had sold irreplaceable pieces for far below market value to enable their own luxury purchases, rather than preserving the collection or honoring my relationships with the artists whose work they were liquidating. When I finally regained consciousness in January, after 3 months of intensive medical care, and against the odds my family had apparently calculated, the first thing I noticed wasn't my family's relief at my survival. It was my brother David, showing off photos of his new Lamborghini to the ICU nurses. "This is what I bought with my inheritance," David was saying proudly as he scrolled through photos on his phone. Catherine always said art was a good investment, and she was right. Converting her collection into something practical has really improved my quality of life. The casual reference to my art collection as his inheritance, while I was lying in a hospital bed, conscious but barely able to speak, was so shocking that I initially thought I was experiencing hallucinations or confusion from my brain injury. But as I listened to more of his conversation with the nursing staff, I realized that David wasn't confused about my survival. He was simply treating my recovery as an inconvenience rather than a miracle. "My sister had excellent taste in art," David continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that I was awake and listening to his conversation. "The auction house said her collection was worth almost $2 million, so even after selling quickly, there was plenty of money for everyone in the family to finally live the way we deserve." The revelation that my entire collection had been sold while I was unconscious hit me like a second accident, causing monitors to start beeping as my heart rate and blood pressure spiked in response to the emotional trauma of learning about their betrayal. But David's casual discussion of my collection's liquidation was just the beginning of what would prove to be the most devastating family conversation of my life, as Jennifer and my parents, Robert and Patricia, arrived for what they called a family meeting to discuss how the remaining proceeds from my art sales would be distributed. "Catherine, we're so happy you're finally awake," my mother Patricia said with false warmth as she arranged chairs around my hospital bed. "We have some exciting news to share about how we've managed your affairs while you were recovering." The euphemistic description of selling my entire art collection as managing my affairs was typical of my family's ability to reframe their selfish actions as responsible family management, but what happened next would reveal the true depth of their exploitation of my unconscious state. The family meeting that took place at my hospital bedside while I was still weak, confused, and barely able to speak coherently was the most devastating conversation of my life, as my relatives divided the remaining proceeds from selling my art collection, while treating my survival as an inconvenience that required revising their spending plans, rather than celebrating as the miracle it actually was. "Catherine, we need to discuss the financial arrangements we've made during your recovery," my father Robert said, as he pulled out a manila folder containing what appeared to be detailed accounting of how they had liquidated and distributed my life's work. "We've been very responsible about managing your assets while you were unable to make decisions for yourself." The clinical language about managing assets and financial arrangements was designed to make their theft sound like prudent family financial planning. But the documents Robert was reviewing clearly showed systematic liquidation of my art collection for their personal benefit, rather than preservation of my cultural investments. We sold your art collection through Hartwell Auctions for $1.6 million, Jennifer announced, as if she was sharing good news rather than devastating information. After auction fees and taxes, we netted about $1.4 million, which has allowed the family to make some important investments in our future security. The casual announcement that my entire collection had been sold while I was unconscious was delivered with the same tone someone might use to discuss routine financial management, but the amount they had received was significantly below the collection's actual value, suggesting they had prioritized quick liquidation over maximizing returns. We got excellent prices considering the circumstances, David added, while scrolling through more photos of his luxury purchases. The auction house said emergency estate sales always get lower prices, but we needed to secure the assets quickly before legal complications could arise. Have you ever been too weak to protest, while family members discussed how they had sold your life's work for their personal benefit? That's exactly what I was experiencing as my brain injury recovery left me unable to express my outrage and devastation at learning about their betrayal. David used his portion to buy the Lamborghini and invest in a franchise opportunity, Patricia continued, as she reviewed the distribution spreadsheet. Jennifer purchased that beautiful beach house in Malibu that she's always dreamed of owning. The detailed accounting of how my art collection had been converted into luxury purchases for my family members was both methodical and heartless, treating irreplaceable cultural artifacts as simple commodities that could be liquidated to fund their lifestyle improvements. Your father and I are using our share for a world cruise that we've been planning for years, Patricia added with genuine excitement about travel plans funded by my stolen collection. We've booked first-class accommodations for a 6-month tour of Europe and Asia that will be the experience of a lifetime. The enthusiasm about luxury travel funded by selling my art collection while I fought for my life in a medically induced coma was so disconnected from reality that I wondered if I was still experiencing cognitive effects from my brain injury. We saved some money for your medical expenses and rehabilitation, Robert said, as if he was being generous rather than acknowledging basic responsibility. About $200,000 should be more than enough to cover your ongoing care and help you get back on your feet. The allocation of $200,000 from my $1.4 million collection for my own medical expenses, while they spent over $1.2 million on luxury purchases, was both practically inadequate and morally offensive, demonstrating their priorities regarding my recovery versus their recreational spending. But the most devastating revelation came when Jennifer casually mentioned the sale of Professor Mitchell's irreplaceable painting that had been the emotional centerpiece of my collection. We had to sell that expensive painting by your old teacher separately to a private collector, Jennifer said dismissively. The auction house thought it might not get good bids because it was so personal and specific, so we found a collector who paid $150,000 cash for immediate purchase. The news that they had sold Professor Mitchell's final work, irreplaceable not just for its $400,000 value, but for its personal significance as a gift from my mentor, for less than half its worth to generate quick cash, was devastating beyond anything I could have imagined. The collector was very excited about adding it to his investment portfolio, David added, apparently oblivious to the fact that Professor Mitchell's painting wasn't just an investment, but a connection to the person who had shaped my entire career and understanding of art. The casual treatment of my mentor's final gift as a commodity to be flipped for quick profit demonstrated their complete inability to understand art as anything beyond financial assets. But it also revealed the depth of their betrayal of relationships and memories that were irreplaceable. Catherine, you should be grateful that your accident helped our family finally achieve the financial security we've always deserved, Jennifer said, as she showed photos of her new beach house on her phone. The house has a perfect view of the ocean that will be wonderful for your healing when you're ready for rehabilitation therapy. The suggestion that I should be grateful for their theft because it had provided them with luxury accommodations that might somehow benefit my recovery was so absurd and cruel that several nurses who were monitoring my condition looked visibly uncomfortable with the conversation they were witnessing. This whole experience has taught us that life is short and we should enjoy opportunities when they arise, Patricia added as she discussed cruise itineraries funded by my art collection. Your accident showed us that we shouldn't wait to pursue our dreams when we have the resources available. The philosophical justification for their theft based on lessons learned from my near-death experience was both psychologically manipulative and legally incriminating, since it demonstrated their awareness that they had exploited my unconscious state to fund their personal desires. As my family continued to discuss their luxury purchases and travel plans, funded by selling my life's work, I realized that their betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about their fundamental inability to understand or respect the passion and relationships that had defined my adult life and career. But while they were celebrating their windfall and treating my survival as a complication in their spending plans, I was beginning to understand that their premature liquidation of my estate while I was unconscious had created legal and ethical violations that would ultimately cost them far more than they had gained through their theft. The woman who was too weak to speak during their bedside division of stolen art money was about to become someone who would use her recovery, her art world connections, and her legal knowledge to ensure that their exploitation of my unconscious state would result in consequences they never could have anticipated. The devastating reality of my losses became increasingly clear during the weeks following my discharge from the hospital, as I began contacting the artists, galleries, and collectors who had been part of my network for over a decade, only to discover the full scope of the damage my family had caused to relationships and cultural contributions that had taken years to build. Catherine, we were heartbroken to learn about your accident, but we were even more shocked when your family contacted us about liquidating your collection. Maria Santos, the young artist whose career I had been supporting, told me during one of the most difficult phone calls of my recovery. They sold the 3 pieces you owned of my work for far below gallery prices, and they refused to give the buyers any information about your curatorial vision or the historical context of the pieces. The systematic devaluation of artwork through emergency sales had not only cost me financially, but had also damaged the market positions of artists whose careers I had been helping to establish. My family's approach to liquidation had treated each piece as an isolated commodity, rather than understanding the collection as a curated cultural statement that enhanced the value and significance of individual works. Your brother David told us that you had lost interest in supporting emerging artists and wanted to focus on practical investments, another artist informed me. We were confused because that seemed completely inconsistent with your passion and commitment over the years, but he insisted that your priorities had changed. The false narratives my family had created to justify their sales were not only personally offensive, but had also damaged my professional relationships and reputation within the art community. They had essentially rewritten my identity and values to make their theft seem like legitimate estate management rather than exploitation of my unconscious state. But perhaps the most devastating discovery was learning how they had handled the sale of Professor Mitchell's painting, which represented not just significant financial value, but irreplaceable emotional and cultural significance that they had treated as mere dollars to be extracted. The buyer who purchased Professor Mitchell's final work contacted us about authentication and provenance, the gallery director who had represented my mentor told me. When we explained the painting's significance as his final piece and its importance to your collection, the buyer seemed uncomfortable with the circumstances of the sale and asked questions about whether proper procedures had been followed. The ethical concerns raised by legitimate art market participants about my family's sales practices suggested that their liquidation of my collection had violated not just legal standards, but also the professional standards that govern responsible art transactions. Have you ever discovered that people claiming to protect your interests had actually damaged relationships and professional standing you had spent years developing? That's exactly what I was learning as I assessed the full scope of my family's betrayal beyond just the financial theft. Catherine, several collectors in our network have mentioned being approached by your family about purchasing pieces from your collection. Dr. Margaret Chen, my former professor and current mentor, told me during a visit to my apartment. The offers were always presented as urgent sales due to your medical expenses, which made people uncomfortable about the circumstances and the pressure to make quick decisions. The pattern of using my medical crisis as leverage to pressure buyers into quick purchases at below-market prices revealed that my family had systematically exploited sympathy for my condition to facilitate their theft, making potential buyers complicit in what they believed was necessary medical fundraising. But what proved to be even more valuable was discovering that several art world professionals had been so concerned about the circumstances of my collection's liquidation that they had documented the sales process, creating evidence that would be crucial for the legal case I was beginning to build. Your family's approach to selling your collection raised red flags throughout the art community. Attorney Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in art law and estate fraud, explained during our initial consultation. Emergency liquidation of a collection while the owner is in a coma, selling below market value, and providing false information about the owner's intentions constitute serious violations of estate management laws. The legal framework for challenging my family's actions was more comprehensive than I had initially realized, with specific statutes protecting incapacitated individuals from premature asset liquidation and fraudulent estate management by family members claiming emergency authority. We can pursue both criminal charges for estate fraud and civil recovery for damages that include not just the money they stole, but also the professional harm caused by their misrepresentation of your intentions and values, Sarah continued. The art community's documentation of their concerning behavior provides excellent evidence for prosecution. But while building the legal case that would expose my family's crimes, I was also working on something equally important, using my recovery time to reconnect with the artists and cultural relationships they had damaged through their thoughtless liquidation of work that represented years of collaboration and mutual support. Catherine, I want you to know that several of us have been discussing how to help you rebuild your collection, Maria Santos told me during a studio visit where she showed me new work she had been creating. We understand that what happened wasn't your choice, and we want to support your recovery both personally and professionally. The solidarity and support from the art community was both emotionally healing and strategically important, since it demonstrated that my professional relationships and cultural contributions were valued beyond their monetary components, something my family had never understood or respected. Over the following months, while my family enjoyed their luxury purchases and travel plans funded by my stolen collection, I was quietly rebuilding both my physical health and my legal case with the help of art world professionals who were appalled by what had happened during my unconscious state. The evidence we've gathered shows a clear pattern of estate fraud and professional misconduct, Prosecutor David Chen explained, as we prepared the criminal charges that would be filed against my family. Their premature liquidation of your collection while misrepresenting your condition and intentions constitutes serious federal crimes. The federal government's interest in prosecuting my family's crimes was both validating and empowering, confirming that their actions represented serious violations of laws designed to protect incapacitated individuals from financial exploitation by trusted family members. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the case development was knowing that my family's own spending patterns and public statements about their windfalls had created comprehensive evidence of their crimes, making it impossible for them to claim innocence or minimize their theft. Every luxury purchase they've made and every false statement they've given about your collection's liquidation is evidence that will be used against them in court, Sarah explained as we reviewed social media posts and financial records documenting their spending spree. 6 months after waking up from my coma to discover their betrayal, I was ready to execute a legal strategy that would expose their crimes, recover my stolen assets, and ensure they faced serious consequences for exploiting my unconscious state to fund their lifestyle improvements. The timing was perfect. Jennifer had organized a beach house celebration to mark the 6-month anniversary of her real estate investment success, providing the ideal setting for serving federal papers and beginning their education about the consequences of estate fraud and art theft. The beach house celebration that would bring my family's fraudulent spending spree to its dramatic conclusion was held at the $450,000 Malibu property Jennifer had purchased with proceeds from selling my art collection, designed as a party to celebrate what she called her smart investment decisions and perfect timing in the real estate market. The irony that she was hosting a success party with money stolen from my life's work while I was still recovering from the injuries that had made their theft possible was both cruel and strategically perfect for the legal reckoning that was about to unfold. I can't believe it's been 6 months since I bought this amazing house, Jennifer posted on social media while preparing for her celebration. Sometimes the best opportunities come from unexpected circumstances, and I'm grateful for the chance to finally live the lifestyle I've always deserved. The false narrative about unexpected opportunities and deserving a luxury lifestyle funded by stealing from her unconscious sister was both personally offensive and legally perfect, since it demonstrated her awareness that her wealth was connected to my accident, while justifying her exploitation of the situation. The beach house itself was everything I would have loved to own someday through my own work and success. Panoramic ocean views, carefully designed living spaces, and walls that would have been perfect for displaying the art collection that Jennifer had helped liquidate to purchase the property. Catherine, you have to come see Jennifer's beautiful new house. My mother, Patricia, had called to invite me to the celebration. The ocean views are so therapeutic, and being around family will be good for your recovery. We're all so grateful that your accident led to such positive changes for everyone. The suggestion that I should attend a celebration of purchases made with my stolen art collection, framed as gratitude that my near-death experience had benefited my family, was so absurd and cruel that it perfectly captured their complete disconnection from reality and basic human decency. I accepted the invitation, knowing that this would be the most satisfying day of my recovery, as I watched federal investigators dismantle their fraudulent celebration, while exposing their crimes to everyone they had invited to witness their stolen success. The celebration was attended by over 40 people, including extended family members, Jennifer's friends, and neighbors who had been impressed by her apparent real estate success and sudden lifestyle improvement. The guest list provided the perfect audience for witnessing the dramatic reversal of fortune that was about to unfold. "Jennifer has such amazing taste and financial sense," I heard one neighbor telling another as they toured the house purchased with my art collection proceeds. "She managed to buy this property at exactly the right time and has been living like a millionaire ever since." The admiration for Jennifer's supposed financial acumen while she was actually spending money stolen from her disabled sister was both infuriating and strategically useful, since the witnesses to her success story would also witness the exposure of her crimes. Have you ever attended a party funded by money stolen from you while the thief accepted praise for their financial success? That's exactly what I was experiencing as Jennifer's guests celebrated her achievement in purchasing luxury real estate with proceeds from liquidating my life's work. At exactly 3 p.m., when Jennifer's celebration was at its peak and all the invited guests were present to witness the occasion, FBI Special Agent Patricia Rodriguez and her team arrived with federal marshals and comprehensive arrest and seizure warrants that would end Jennifer's party and begin her journey through the criminal justice system. "Jennifer Ellis, you are under arrest for estate fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft," Agent Rodriguez announced as she placed handcuffs on Jennifer in front of her shocked party guests. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The silence that followed Jennifer's arrest was absolute and profound, as 40 party guests processed what they were witnessing. The successful woman whose real estate investment they had been celebrating was being arrested for federal crimes that had funded her entire lifestyle. David Ellis, Robert Ellis, and Patricia Ellis, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit estate fraud and theft of assets belonging to Catherine Ellis. Agent Rodriguez continued, as additional agents placed handcuffs on my family members, while their guests watched in stunned disbelief. The systematic arrest of every family member who had participated in liquidating my art collection was both thorough and dramatic, but what made it even more impactful was that it was happening in front of people who had been celebrating their apparent financial success. "This beach house and all other assets purchased with fraudulently liquidated art collection proceeds are being seized by the federal government," another agent announced as the asset forfeiture team began documenting Jennifer's luxury possessions and furnishings purchased with stolen money. The comprehensive seizure of assets bought with proceeds from my art collection was both efficient and satisfying, with federal agents photographing and cataloging everything from Jennifer's expensive furniture to David's Lamborghini to our parents' cruise deposits and luxury travel gear. But the most meaningful moment came when I finally had the opportunity to address the assembled guests who had been celebrating my family's success, while remaining unaware that their lifestyle improvements were funded by theft from their unconscious family member. 6 months ago, while I was fighting for my life in a medically induced coma after a car accident, my family sold my entire $1.8 million art collection and used the proceeds to buy luxury houses, cars, and vacation packages, I announced to the stunned party guests, who were now understanding the true source of Jennifer's beach house and sudden prosperity. The comprehensive explanation of my family's crimes was being delivered to an audience that included many of the people who had praised their financial success and admired their apparent investment acumen over the past 6 months. Every piece in my collection represented years of relationships with emerging artists, cultural contributions to our community, and personal passion that my family treated as simple commodities to be liquidated for their immediate pleasure. I continued, finally able to share the truth about what their celebration had actually been funded by. While I was unconscious and unable to protect my life's work, they sold irreplaceable pieces for far below market value, lied to buyers about my condition and intentions, and used the proceeds to fund lifestyle improvements, while telling people I had lost interest in supporting artists and culture. The detailed accounting of their crimes was both personally cathartic and legally significant, providing public testimony about their fraud that would be useful during prosecution, while also vindicating my reputation within the community that had been confused by their false narratives about my supposed change in priorities. As federal agents continued processing evidence and my family members were transported to federal custody, I realized that this moment represented not just justice for their crimes, but also the beginning of my own comprehensive recovery from both my medical trauma and their financial exploitation. The people who had sold my life's work while I was unconscious were finally facing consequences that reflected the magnitude of their betrayal, and the legal case would ensure that the cultural and personal relationships they had damaged would be restored and protected. But more importantly, the art community's support during my recovery, and the federal government's prosecution of their crimes, had demonstrated that there were people who understood the difference between cultural stewardship and commodity exploitation, and who were committed to protecting both artistic integrity and vulnerable individuals from family members who would exploit them. The comprehensive legal and financial resolution that followed my family's dramatic arrests at Jennifer's stolen beach house moved through federal court with remarkable speed and efficiency, driven by overwhelming evidence of their crimes and the clear documentation they had created through their own spending patterns and false statements about my collection's liquidation during my unconscious state. Jennifer, David, Robert, and Patricia Ellis ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple federal felony charges including estate fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, wire fraud, and elder abuse, receiving sentences ranging from 3 to 6 years in federal prison plus comprehensive restitution requirements that would ensure I received not just my stolen money, but also substantial damages for their crimes. The defendants systematically exploited their family members' medical incapacitation to steal and liquidate a valuable art collection, lying to buyers about the circumstances and using the proceeds for luxury purchases while the victim fought for her life, Federal Judge Michael Chen said during their sentencing hearing. This represents one of the most callous cases of family financial exploitation this court has encountered. The judicial condemnation was both personally validating and legally significant, establishing important precedent for protecting incapacitated individuals from premature asset liquidation by family members who exploit medical crises to facilitate theft and financial manipulation. But perhaps more importantly, the asset forfeiture and restitution process resulted in recovery of not just the $1, $4 million they had stolen from my collection liquidation, but an additional $800,000 in damages, penalties, and punitive awards that reflected the cultural harm and professional damage their crimes had caused. Ms. Ellis, the Comprehensive Restitution Award recognizes both the financial theft and the cultural damage caused by your family's liquidation of your art collection, Civil Attorney Sarah Mitchell explained as we finalized the recovery process. This settlement acknowledges that art collections have value beyond their monetary worth, and that premature liquidation causes harm that extends beyond simple financial loss. The legal recognition that my collection had cultural and professional significance beyond its market value was both personally meaningful and professionally important, establishing precedent for protecting art collections from family members who view them only as financial assets to be liquidated during emergencies. Using the recovered funds exactly as I had originally intended, I was able to begin rebuilding my collection while also establishing the Catherine Ellis Artist Support Foundation, which provides emergency financial assistance to emerging artists, while also offering legal protection for collectors whose families might exploit medical incapacitation to liquidate cultural assets. Catherine's case demonstrates how family members can exploit medical crises to steal not just money, but also cultural contributions that represent years of relationship building and community investment, I testified, before a congressional subcommittee examining estate fraud prevention. Stronger protections for incapacitated individuals could prevent similar thefts from devastating other collectors and the artists they support. The legislative testimony was both personally healing and professionally meaningful, allowing me to transform our family's crimes into systemic changes that would protect other art collectors and cultural contributors from similar exploitation during vulnerable periods. Have you ever been able to use your own victimization to create protections that would help thousands of other people avoid similar exploitation? That's exactly what I experienced as my family's crimes became the foundation for stronger legal safeguards and emergency support systems for collectors and artists. The most meaningful development was reconnecting with the artists whose careers I had been supporting before my accident, many of whom had been devastated by the sudden disappearance of my advocacy and the confusing messages my family had delivered about my supposed change in priorities and values. Catherine, we never believed that you had lost interest in supporting emerging artists. Maria Santos told me during a studio visit where she showed me the new work she had been creating during my recovery. Your passion and commitment were too genuine to disappear overnight, and we suspected something was wrong when your family couldn't explain your supposed change of heart. The loyalty and understanding from artists who had known my true character and values was both emotionally healing and professionally validating, confirming that authentic relationships in the art world are based on more than just financial transactions and cannot be destroyed by family members who misunderstand cultural stewardship. We've been planning a group exhibition to welcome you back to the art community and to demonstrate that your contributions haven't been forgotten, another artist informed me. Several galleries want to participate, and collectors who knew about your situation have offered to loan works for the show. The collaborative effort to rebuild my presence in the art community was more meaningful than any individual purchase could have been, demonstrating that cultural relationships are based on mutual respect and shared values that cannot be liquidated or stolen by people who view art only as commodity investment. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my recovery was using the restitution money to begin acquiring works by the same artists my family had sold, often purchasing pieces directly from the artists at fair market prices that supported their ongoing development rather than viewing them as emergency liquidation opportunities. This piece is dedicated to your resilience and to everyone who stands up against people who try to steal cultural contributions, Maria Santos said, as she presented me with a new painting created specifically to mark my return to collecting. Art survives because people like you understand that it's about more than money. It's about human connection and cultural legacy. The dedication was both personally meaningful and professionally significant, representing the kind of relationship between artist and collector that my family had never understood and could never have rebuilt through their commodity-focused approach to cultural assets. 3 years after my accident, and 2 years after my family's federal convictions for art theft and estate fraud, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Conference on Art Law and Estate Protection, speaking to an audience of legal professionals, museum directors, and collectors about the importance of protecting cultural assets from family exploitation. My family sold my life's work while I was unconscious, treating irreplaceable cultural relationships as emergency cash to fund their luxury purchases, I told the audience of art law specialists. Their crimes weren't just financial theft. They were cultural vandalism that damaged relationships with artists, disrupted market development for emerging talents, and violated the trust that makes art collecting a form of cultural stewardship. The presentation was both educational and cathartic, allowing me to honor the memory of Professor Mitchell and the other mentors who had shaped my understanding of art as cultural responsibility rather than mere investment opportunity. As I concluded my keynote with a comprehensive tribute to the artists and cultural professionals who had supported my recovery, I realized that my family's theft had ultimately led to outcomes that were more meaningful and impactful than simply maintaining my original collection in private. The stolen artworks had been recovered and redistributed to support emerging artists. My family's crimes had created stronger legal protections for other collectors, and my experience had established a foundation that would help both artists and collectors navigate crisis situations that might otherwise result in cultural destruction. Most importantly, I had learned that authentic cultural stewardship creates relationships that cannot be stolen or liquidated, and that the art community's response to exploitation demonstrates values that transcend monetary considerations. If you're reading this, and you have family members who view your cultural contributions or professional achievements as financial assets to be claimed during emergencies, please know that there are legal protections and advocacy resources available to help you protect your work and relationships from exploitation. Sometimes the people who should protect your interests during medical crises are actually the ones most willing to liquidate your life's work for their immediate benefit. But cultural stewardship creates bonds that cannot be broken by commodity theft, and communities that understand the difference between investment and exploitation will always support authentic contribution over opportunistic liquidation. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had family members exploit your medical vulnerability or professional achievements? How did you rebuild relationships and protect your work from people who viewed it only as financial opportunity? Your story might help someone else who's facing similar exploitation during their recovery. Thank you for joining me on this journey from unconscious vulnerability, through devastating betrayal, to ultimate cultural and legal vindication. Remember that your professional contributions and cultural relationships are worth fighting to protect, even when the exploitation comes from family members who should have been supporting your recovery instead of profiting from your incapacitation. See you in our next story here at Her Sweet Revenge.